Hello and good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Cassia Romano Anthony, and I'm the Director of Programs here at the America-Israel Friendship League. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Sunday's webinar, which is really a celebration of friendship and leadership. It's almost about 16 years ago that the America-Israel Friendship League had the first opportunity to partner with the National Conference of State Legislatures under the stewardship of former New York Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver. Today, this relationship has blossomed into a mutually beneficial partnership, with the League having hosted about 8 legislative delegations and about 60 legislators in Israel. Today, we prepare to commemorate International Women's Day with the rest of the world and are taking this particular relationship one step further, collaborating with the Women's Legislative Network of the NCSL. Today, we honor in part the stories of all of our female leaders and highlighting and celebrating female legislative leaders from both the US and Israel. These women serve as role models for future generations and leaders in both countries and share stories filled with strength, dedication, passion, and tenacity, carrying the banner of hope and inspiration for those who aspire to follow in their footsteps. Leading today's panel discussion with these particular chosen phenomenal female leaders is none other than our very own female leader at the AIFL, who is uniquely positioned as an Israeli national with both personal and professional ties to both countries. She's intimately familiar with the legislative process in both countries, having interned at the Knesset during her early career. It is my pleasure to introduce none other than our national board member, Elsa Ben-Shimon, who is a partner at Strzok, also known as Strzok and Levan. Elsa?
Thank you so much, Cassia, for your very kind words and introduction. Hello, everybody. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Cassia, Wayne Firestone, Ruby Shamir, and Giovanni Cossetti of the America-Israel Friendship League for organizing the webinar today. And also thank Jonathan Balsadeh and the entire leadership team and staff of AIFL who continue to find creative ways to promote the organization's mission to make friends for Israel, even during this pandemic, when unfortunately in-person meetings and delegations to Israel are not taking place. This webinar series, which was launched last year by AIFL, offers 2 programs a week and has been just a wonderful way to bring people together by introducing speakers from both Israel and the United States to showcase the commonalities and shared values of both countries and people from both countries. Today's program is particularly exciting. As Cassia says, we're celebrating International Women's Day, which is being marked tomorrow around the world, as well as Women's History Month. And it's a true honor and pleasure to be moderating today's webinar entitled The Climb, Women and the Legislative Ladder. As Cassia mentioned, my name is Elsa Ben-Shimon. I'm a board member of AIFL. I joined AIFL 2 years ago. I'm from Israel, but I'm based in New York currently, where I'm a partner at Strzok and Levan, a law firm here in New York. And as Cassia also mentioned, I did start my career years ago as a parliamentary aide at the Knesset in Israel. So this is particularly delightful. It's sort of a wonderful way to celebrate this. And we are really joined by a truly esteemed panel today of speakers. We have 2 legislators from the United States, currently serve as state senators, as well as 2 former members of Knesset from Israel. It's a real thrill to have been able to meet these ladies in preparation for this webinar, and I can't wait to hear what they'll tell us about their experiences in government. So we'll start with introducing Senator Sarah Feigenholtz of Illinois, who's also the president of the Women's Legislative Network of the NCSL. Senator Feigenholtz would like for you to just tell us a few words about your career and your climb to power.
Well, thank you, Elsa, for that amazing introduction. I was really excited to be the sitting president of the Women's Leadership Network and to be, doing this, having this opportunity to talk to women around the country and around the world, especially Israel, which is a very special place to me. I have been in the legislature for 24 years. I have just ascended to the Senate. If you want to talk about climbing a ladder, I've just been in the Senate. I was actually in the Senate for 11 days, and then bam, COVID hit. So I've been a senator in a little screen for a year. It's just delightful to be here because I think that we have a lot to share and a lot to learn. I always appreciated my learning about the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and always sort of compared and contrasted the difference in the cultures as far as women ascending. And I think that is going to be something exciting to talk about, the kind of legislation that we sponsor, and how we are storytellers and we live our lives in a way that, my mother was an immigrant. She came to America from Russia and put herself through medical school. And so I grew up in a home, and she graduated in 1932. And that's a long story, but I grew up in a home that where my mother worked in a male-dominated profession, and she was a single mother. So I think we have a lot to share here, and I'm really looking forward to this and talk about how what we go through in our lives empower us on our way up as we try and get up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Feigenholtz. I'll turn it over to former member of Knesset, Aliza Lavi, to tell us a little bit about herself and her career.
Thank you, Cassia, and thank all of you for this amazing meeting and opportunity. And I used to work with the American Council Israeli League before, and thanks for all your work. It's good to have this organization that think about examples like this, and we have a lot to share and to learn from each other. We want to change the world, and we have to do it together. I came to the Israeli parliament, and I was there almost 7 years, and from the first moment I became the chairperson of the Committee of Status of Women. And actually, I didn't like the name Status of Women, and I added to the name of the committee Gender Equality. And I think this is the story. I mean, together, Status of Women and Gender Equality. And I found myself working very hard for women. And when I'm thinking about myself, it didn't start in the parliament. It started before, as a teenager, that thinking around and see what's happened here in Israel, and to be part of a youth movement. And then after, as an officer in the Israeli army, and I always was involved in civil rights, and especially gender gap that I saw it everywhere since I finished, the officer course. So it was only 3 opportunities for women to go, either to do this or that, but you can't compare to the situation for my youngest, for example, when she finished her course as an officer in the Israeli army a year ago, she had a lot of opportunities to serve, and she could ask to be here and there. Actually, when we speak about the Israeli army, so something like 96% of the places are open for women now. It didn't happen like this. It happened after a long process, and it didn't finish. We have to work very hard to continue. So the situation in Israel is, on one hand, very, very good if we are talking about, legislation. Israel is really in a good place, but the problem is that we don't give enough attention and what is going on with all legislation. And if women and men are familiar with the rights and know how to ask and where to go. And like the senator has said, I grew up in a family that my grandmother was the role model in my life. My grandmother came to Israel in 1920 from Afghanistan. Yes, Afghanistan, directly to Jerusalem, to all the Jerusalem. She became, as a wealthy woman together with her husband, and suddenly became a widow. With not a language with her, with nothing. She raised 6 kids, and always I asked myself how she did it. And from her example and my parents, that both of them start from the beginning here in the early days in Israel, I know what is to take control and find abilities to create a better world for us. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Eliza. I will turn it now to Senator Mary Keff Meyer of Minnesota.
Hi there, Elsa. Great to be with you today. And thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for having me and for us. And thank you to the America-Israel Friendship League for your hosting, and to the National Conference of State Legislatures for enabling me to be a part of this wonderful participation with the whole panel and everybody that's involved here. Just really an exciting opportunity. You know, currently I'm state chair of state government finance policy and elections, but about a year and a half ago, I had an opportunity to go to Israel with JCRC. So I spent 11 days, and my love and admiration for Israel and its people only increased even more as I got to know them. Matter of fact, this necklace I have on, the Eilat stone, Eilat, I believe it is, I purchased in Israel, and I wear it proudly every day as a special reminder of Israel and its people. So as the state chair right now, I also serve on the full finance committee. I'm on the judiciary committee and also serve on many task force, from child support task force, child care task force, legislative audit commission. I'm on the Senate ethics committee as well. So it's been a really exciting time. I also grew up in a home, very poor home, the oldest of 14 children. And we shared a lot in common with other people, but it was different. I didn't have to worry about obesity, just so you know. When you grew up in a large family, my mom was a great cook, my dad was a hard worker, and she eventually started a business in our backyard. Still going today, still serving wonderful food with my mother's recipes. So I think for me, as I've come along the way, I think sometimes the holdback sometimes is a belief in myself, not so much that anybody held me back. My father and I debated at the kitchen table in preparation for high school debate team. And my dad held me no corner when it came to holding my own, which has come in very, very good as I entered a variety of fields, which for me as a youngster, the choice was nursing or teaching, and I chose nursing. I'm grateful for that, taught me many skills that I use today. I call it sometimes you take the temperature of the patient or the pulse of the electorate. Sensitivity to the needs of people, representing them and bringing their issues. And that sometimes my patients weren't always conscious. Sometimes people aren't really consciously aware of the importance of the legislative process in their lives. So I work hard to help inform and educate, bring their needs and concerns here, but also bring back information to them as well. I think it's a value to us in America at realizing that in Israel, I saw when I was there in Israel that the mandatory service was required of all when they graduated, men and women. And I saw them, and I think working side by side in a common focus of taking care of their country, serving their country, I thought that would be such a great way to kind of get a start. But I also found there was an older woman who I had quite a few conversations with along the way. And she would say to me, Mary, don't be afraid, just step into it and it'll come. And she said, you know, it's interesting. Men don't have that trouble. They just do. They step into it. You know, it's kind of one of those things, but I think women were a little more cautious, a little more careful. That is a strength, actually. But what I have found in serving in the legislature alongside the men and alongside other women, that the focus is on what do you know, what's your competency. My being a nurse, they look to me, my experience as Secretary of State for 8 years, and actually I worked in the polling place for 11 years before I even thought of running for Secretary of State and being the state's chief election official. But all of those things that I bring with me are extremely valuable. And I would say, there are 4 words my mom would say every day when I would leave home, and she'd say, now Mary, work hard, be good, on our way. And I would say many of the keys to my mom and dad, their example, and those great words, work hard and be good. And I would add to it now, don't be afraid, step into it, women. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these really inspirational words. Step into it. I'll have to remember that, and I'll definitely use it. Thank you. So to round it out, our final panelist is also former member of Knesset, Michal Ozin. Michal, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and maybe words of wisdom that you've heard and heed to this day?
Okay, thank you everybody. I hope that we will reach inequality between the genders and we don't need to mark the Women's Day anymore. That will be our trophy. So I'm a former member of the Knesset. I was a representative of the leftist party Meretz. Before I were elected to the parliament, I was the executive director of the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel and led the umbrella organization of 9 rape crisis centers for victims of sexual assault throughout the country. As a leader in the field of gender diversity and inclusion in the political and social spheres in Israel, I advocate for the rights of diverse population groups as women, LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, Palestinian citizens and residents, migrant workers, refugees, asylum seekers, and so on. In my view, the promotion of gender equality includes the promotion of equality in general, promoting diversity and inclusion of all population groups. So as a legislator, I have promoted laws that promote equality to a wide range of groups in the population suffering from inequality, discrimination, and deprivation. I led a fight against violence against women, including physical, emotional, economic, and sexual violence. Of course, aim to increase severity punishment against those that abuse and murder women, a big, huge problem in Israel these days, and for recognition in cases of self-defense against an abusive partner. I legislated laws to protect women, to expand the legal definition of sexual violence, to improve the enforcement and legislative system against sexual offenders, fought against gender segregation in public events and academic institutions, fought against employment discrimination against women, and with my friend Aliza, that she's here with us on this panel, and other, we promote the law to punish clients of prostitutions. Moreover, the promotion of gender equality is done in every field and interest, even those who do not appear to be engaged in equality or discrimination. For example, the need to combine 3 universal values: protection, equality, and peace. And for me, that's my whole career, with an emphasis on the unique status of women. As such, I form a lobby in the Knesset for women, peace and security, to fight for a comprehensive plan of action from the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 to ensure equal participation of women in all decision-making. And I think this year with COVID-19, we've seen all over the world, and of course in Israel, how much it's important that women will be in decision-making position and take care of our unique needs. So we have to protect women from violence and to include gender assessment of diverse groups of women to prevent violence and promote peace. So I believe that we have to look past this last year and to ask ourselves, why women-led nation doing better with the COVID-19, and what is the new leader or female leader that we have to look at and to see and to learn how to behave in leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michal. I think we're ready now that we got to know you a little bit to kick off the conversation. I'll start with Senator Feigenholtz with the first question. which is what has been your impact on the legislative process, and perhaps if you could also include in your answer a little bit about, particularly as a woman, if there were specific challenges in being impactful in the process and in achieving, goals that you've set.
Thanks. Of course, I'll be glad to tell you. So I'm going to just sort of follow on what Michal said about the work that she's been doing, because it has certainly been the focus of, my focus, because I feel as though, most men my experience has been that most men aren't coming into a legislative body thinking about what you just spoke about, which is why it is so important for women to have a seat at the table, because, if you don't have a seat at the table, you end up on the menu. That's what we say in America. So, for instance, I know this is not how it is in Israel, but in our state, we have a formulary for Medicaid. And so we have public and private insurance. And believe it or not, in 2005, women, birth control was never, contraceptives of any kind were not covered by commercial insurance. And so in 2005, I passed a law that basically said that any insurance company that has a prescription drug program must include contraception for reproductive health. And you would have thought that that would have been an easy thing to do. I know that it's already something that is law, not even law, it's just practice in Israel. And we had to fight for years to get that done. Contraception had been on the market for 40 years in this country before we were able to pass that law in Illinois, which, is sort of why I want to illustrate some of the changes. I also passed a law that I thought was very discriminatory, that also women who were on public assistance, public insurance, did not have access to abortion care in the state. Many of you know about the Hyde Amendment. So essentially, Illinois became the first state in the country since the Roe versus Wade decision to repeal that and start funding Medicaid, reproductive and abortion care for the very women who need access the most. And I see healthcare decisions as a very fundamental part of making career decisions. Women should have control over when they go to school, when they have families. So, and I see access to healthcare, including reproductive healthcare of all kinds, with no limitations, as a path to independence for women, so that they have their decision-making controls and other people don't control them, and economics don't control them. And I think that that is essentially how we lift women out of poverty. And we, and also, Michal, what you were talking about, issues around sexual assault. We have had a rash of, and continue to see a rash of, bullying and sexual harassment in the workplace. And legislatures are beginning to really get serious about this, and they better. The very long-serving Speaker of the House here in Illinois just ended his career, and much of his problems began with bullying and sexual harassment going on around him. He made a correction, and I give him credit for that. But it was, something. Let's just say it was a long time coming. But I think mostly, when I was in the House, I was the chairman of the Appropriations Committee for Human Services, which was the hugest part of the budget. It was public health, it was Veterans Affairs, Medicaid. It incorporated, Michal, everything that you were talking and funding for it. Also, people living with disabilities and mental illness and childcare and all of it. So, and I think that looking through the lens of a woman, looking through the lens of mothers, especially you were talking about, I feel as though COVID has amplified some of the disparities that we have experienced to the point where there is no escaping it. It must be funded. It must be addressed. And it is that moment. We're seeing the same thing in communities of color here that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, but also lack of education, lack of violence, extraordinary amounts of violence and poverty. And I think that we have a new lens we're looking out of. We have a very, very young female-dominated or female-centric, I should say, because many of the men are very conscious of what is going on in the lives of women in this country, or in Illinois at least. And I'm very, very hopeful as I see legislation being sponsored for housing, for childcare, and women-centric issues being sponsored in this General Assembly. And I'm very excited to see new members, especially men, but mostly women, putting these at the front of the list, putting these issues at the front of the list. And many of these things are things that have already existed in Israel. Again, we are way behind the curve. We don't have in this country what you have. I just read Mazal Shaul. There's a lot of discussion about establishing a women's party in the Knesset. Is that so? Yeah. I would love to hear a little bit about that. We do not have a women's party. We have caucuses, but we do not have a women's party.
And you don't even have a committee like we have in the Israeli parliament. We have a committee for status of women and gender equality, and you have a caucus, not a committee.
We have a, but from what I was reading about how Israeli women are breaking barriers. I'm reading that we have a guest speaker coming from Israel who is going to talk about her time in the Knesset, her time with We Power, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and an Israeli Women's Party, Voice of Women. Is this going to be a formal party in the Knesset?
No, not yet. Please God, maybe next election, in Israel. Unfortunately, but no. They tried to run, but it didn't succeed. Maybe next election. I don't know when it will be, because the situation in the last 2 years, this is part of the problems, because we are talking here about legislations, but unfortunately in the last 2 years, we don't have a parliament that's active, and the government is very, very weak. So we see the situation, the ramification, and more than that, the COVID-19 and, the situation, and especially when we speak about women and salary gaps, education, and all the other problems and issues that we tried together with Michal when we were in the Israeli parliament to make the change, and legislation is not enough, unfortunately. We need to work together in the fields of education and awareness, and we need to have more men involved and more legislator men that understand the situation, that they have daughters and wives and understand the whole picture. And I always ask myself what to do. And yes, I did a lot, and I have more than 20 legislation that I passed. One of them is legislation that promise proper representation of women in municipal government. So when we did it 5 years ago, that every party that had women, 3 women in the first 10, got much more budget that increased in 15%. And to tell you the truth, we see the ramifications. Last election in the municipality, much more women were elected to the municipalities as members of the municipality, as head of the municipality. And then I wanted to have this legislation in the parliament. But unfortunately, I couldn't pass it. You know why? Because in Israel, we have two parties that only men allow to be part of the parties. And I'm talking about the parties that belong to the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel. It means that it was a veto on this suggestion. So this legislation is on the municipality arena, but not on the parliament.
National. So
situations like this in between state and religion and ramifications, etc., etc. So what other tools we have? And it's not only on the parliament. Another example that I can share with you, and before and now I'm, as I told you, I'm activist, a social activist, and the first legislation that I came to the Israeli parliament was a legislation that I tried to work very hard with my colleagues to, in Israel we have two systems. We have the Supreme Court, the court, but also we have rabbinical court. Right. And it's two different systems, and you can imagine what is going in between. So in the civil court, we have men and women, but in the rabbinical court, that you have to go there. Either you want to say this or that, or marry, or divorce, etc., etc. And it doesn't matter if you marry out of Israel in a civil marriage. Always you have to go via the rabbinical court. And the situation that we don't have women in the rabbinical court, but more than that, we didn't have women in the committee that choose the rabbinical court. So my first legislation was to have 4 women in this committee that elect the rabbinical court. And it's a huge change. I'm telling you, when women are involved, like you said before, when women are there, so the people that the committee are chose is different, because you have the power and the tool to elect people in the rabbinical court that understand the situation, that familiar with this situation. So a lot to share with you, but the situation that in Israel, it's not like in the state, because in the state, when we speak about state and religion, is totally different. In Israel, it's not, it's another story. And in between that, as women, as gender situation, it's much more complicated.
Yes. So, it's funny because we do have in our Constitution a separation of church and state, and I absolutely think it makes things more difficult. I also am very aware of Anat Hoffman, who comes to the States for Women of the Wall. She's wonderful. And Michal, the work you ladies are doing is amazing, but don't stop fighting. You're going to win. Keep going.
I would like Senator Keff, Meyer. I think that the theme here has been it's so important to have representation by women in order to raise issues which perhaps men would have not otherwise raised on their own. But also, it sounds like it's instrumental to have collaboration and allyship among women. Michal and Aliza spoke about how they had shared initiatives that they supported together. I'm wondering, Senator Keff, Meyer, in your experience, when you were trying to raise issues that were dubbed women's issues, if you will, did you find that your partners were in other women legislators, or were you also able to get a lot of support from men? And what is that like, really, when you're trying to promote, issues of equity and equality?
Thank you, Elsa. Vibrant discussion. It's really fun to be part of it. My approach has always been to say there are issues. There aren't men issues and women issues. There are issues. Taxes is an issue. And so all of the other ones that they've mentioned are an issue. But women look at things a little differently than the men do. And actually, we need them both. It's not a matter of having all of one or all of the other. but valuing the both. And I think when I've been involved in the legislative process, because I come with that attitude of valuing both, I think I work hard to welcome that. And I think also I intend to be more welcomed as well in that conversation, because I think it's that old thing of if you act like a victim, you become a victim. And I don't like that. I don't want to be that. I don't want to ever be that. So I want to be in the game. I want to be part of it, and respecting the variety of different outlooks. And by the way, just to mention, in our Constitution, we don't have separation of church and state. Our Constitution says we have freedom of religion. That was a letter written by Jefferson and a whole story like that. But I just thought, especially in this kind of audience, it was really important to clarify that sometimes it's been taken that way. But I do think that for me, impacting the process has been being part of it, being involved with it, making my arguments, debating, defending, doing my homework, studying, bring it forward to a more of a convincing kind of a thing with my colleagues. And I have found it to be actually quite welcoming. Sometimes I find, this sounds like interesting, but the men who run in politics tend to be 6 foot at least, and most of the time, and I'm 5'3". And it's really hard sometimes to maintain your power position or what you're thinking when you're looking up. And I had a gentleman one time when I was campaigning for Secretary of State, and he said, that's kind of a big job. It was a coverall guy in my local rural community. He said, Secretary of State, he said, that's kind of a big job, and you're kind of little. And my answer to him was, well, you ever hear of nuclear power? And they kind of got it, but he was like, what does that have to do for a while? But his friend slapped him on the shoulder and say, yeah, Pete, you gotcha. And it was a sense of humor, but he actually meant it kindly. And I wanted to take it that way and choose not to receive it as an insult, but also with a little bit of sense of humor and a response to make my point that it is not about size. It is about the power within it. And so I think that has made a difference to being impactful on every issue, because I do not want to be narrowed and stuck in a pigeonhole. These issues are for women and these issues are for men or something. No, we both look at things differently, and I welcome them both.
Thank you. Michal, would you like to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I want to add to what Aliza said. First, I don't believe that we should establish or to form a women party. I think, a lot of parties, maybe not a lot of them, but there are parties in Israel that promote equality, gender equality, and I think, as I said in the beginning, I can separate between equality to the Arab society, to gender equality, to LGBTQ equality. Human rights are human rights, civil rights are civil rights for everyone. So I think there are parties that fight for that and promote that. In Israel, we have two big issues that we have a lot of issues like all over the world that women cannot be promoted or to get equality, issue of career and home and having children and having child support and all of that. We have it all over the world. We earn 60% less from a man, and we have all kind of problem that is shared all over the world. But we still have two main issues that are very, very strong in Israel. One of them, Aliza talked about it, it's the not state and religious we don't have state religious separation. And this is very, very important because in Israel, marriage and divorce are by the religion. If you're Muslim, if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, only by religious. So you don't have a civil option to get married or a civic option to get divorced. And this gives a lot of power to the men over the women, and of course on children and child support and all of that. That is a big issue. The other issue is the military in Israel is a very profound establishment in Israel, a very important issue, the security. And that's why a lot of women cannot get to the head of the parties in Israel, because we always look for the man, even though he can be a very low position in the army, but when he gets to politics, he's a man, so he understands on security and all of that. Aliza and me and I were part of the Security and Defense Committee in the Knesset, and she can tell you as much as I that if a guy sat there, if even an ultra-Orthodox that never served in the army, they will listen to him more carefully and with respect than listen to me that I will an officer in the army, because you're a woman and you don't really understand and you're talking from emotion and not with your mind, so that's still a big issue in Israel. And the last election, as we saw, we had a lot of generals, representative that were candidate to be prime minister, because everyone that were general in the army, of course, he can be a prime minister. That's what I meant when I talk about the COVID-19, that if we look all over the world, we see that the women, the leader of the world, they have better results in fighting the COVID-19 because they were more transparent, because they listened to the public, because they, they weren't afraid to be weak, or to say, we don't know exactly what's going on, or to be more cautious. And the men say, we will fight it and we will win it, and did all the mistakes. So I think we have a very good legislation in Israel, a very promote legislation, by far in some issues more than in the state, for sure. But the implementation and the enforcement of the law is not so easy, and I think that's the place that we are falling. And at last, I want to say that if you check, research shows that if you check countries and you want to know the status of women in that country, the more the country is democracy, the more in the country we have welfare agenda, the more we have, more taxes, yes, and budget that go to health and welfare, then we have a better status of women. So I think we know how to do it, but not always we put it at first in our agenda.
Yeah. Thanks, Michal. I'd like to turn to another question, which is, I'll turn it to Senator Feigenholtz first. Or in terms of what is a win for you, when you do try to promote a bill or where you participate otherwise in the legislative process, what do you consider to be a win in terms of representing the interests of your constituents and specifically the issues that you stand for when you run for office? And how do you really get there? Because I think what's really interesting is that the women's style of governance is probably very unique and different than the way that men approach it in many ways. So I'd like to hear about what your goals are and then your process in achieving them. You're on mute. You're on mute, Senator.
Sorry. I'd like to respond to that. Something Senator Keff Meyer said about how she approaches her position. And I very, very strongly believe in working with my constituents, empathy, being a good listener, and closing the gap that people feel, my constituents feel, between themselves and government. I usually sit down and draft legislation with my constituents who have found an error or want to improve or close a gap or modernize or use a different method to do something, and bring them along, if you will, to empower people to see that their voice matters and to show them that it is not, that they're not invisible, that they can be part of the process. And that is not a gender issue. Perhaps because I do it and I'm a woman, but I think that for me, I think we owe it to our constituency to, dispel the cynicism and keep people engaged in government. For me, that's very important. And I think when it comes to me, that is a win. I mean, I consider that a win because I feel like I am solving a more global problem, not just that piece of legislation and its impact. So I think that is something very, very unique to women, is that they're also very collaborative. They're not as competitive, and they work together and that's how they grow as a coalition. They put kitchen table items on their agenda that they actually hear from their constituents that impact their day-to-day lives. And, it cannot be, and I know that Senator Keff Meyer is going to agree with me. The state legislatures in the 50 states in our country have enormous power to make change. I'll give you an example. The Affordable Care Act, that came down to a states' rights issue, whether we wanted to expand healthcare or not. Illinois did. I passed the bill. I thought it was a better thing to do, a better way to sort of, a more efficient way of taking care of people and also bringing more federal money. In Illinois, we pay a lot of taxes, and our Medicaid match is only 50%. Mary Keff Meyer, I don't know where yours is, but to be able to tell my constituents, not only is this fair and more efficient, but it is also going to bring back dollars from the federal government. Really spending time with your people, the people you represent, for me is important. Big win. And coalition building. Legislators are in, I know we're Midwesterners. You have two Midwesterners here, okay? And we have, and I know it looks like from what you see on CNN and Fox News that we're always fighting. Senator Keff Meyer, I don't know about your legislature, but in Illinois, 98%, maybe 99.5% of legislation in my state is bipartisan. We agree. We work together. And I chair now in the Senate Tourism and Hospitality. One of the first things I talk to my minority spokesperson all the time. We have meetings together with agencies. We collaborate because we're women. Okay, so and I'm sure that would happen with a man now, and I'm hoping it would. But every day we make progress. And the senator is right. It's not so much what you do, but collaborating and showing people that you're not just fighting, that you do work together to solve problems is probably the biggest win we can put a check a box for.
Thank you. Senator Keff Meyer, would you like to respond to that and tell us about your experience? Yeah.
Oh, I think Senator Feigenholtz and I would have a great time talking about it. Probably one thing that's different, I think Illinois is an all one party rule. In Minnesota, we have divided government. So things are a little bit different, but I would agree with that. And I've told people before, the large majority of the time, we do have that collaborative and we do come together, mainly because Minnesotans deserve that kind of effort from us. I think the win for me as far as my constituents, number one is to be true to what I campaigned on. One thing people hate more than anything is that when you're campaigning, you say one thing and then they'll say, yeah, then you'll get there and you'll get all the big head and everything and you'll change. And I wanted to be true to what I said to them during the campaign, follow through on that. And I would say the biggest thing my constituents want to know, do you hear me? And they'll send emails, make phone calls, a variety of things. And so it's always been really, really important to me to respond as immediately as possible. If nothing else said, got your comments. Thank you so much for taking the time to write to me. And it's amazing sometimes the responses I get was like, wow, you heard me, you listened. And it really, really mattered to them. And I think problem solving, sometimes they get caught up in a government problem and they have issues. And so that constituent services of helping them to get unsnarled from when they've been caught in some government thing. It can be healthcare, it could be plumbing, wiring, the code, building codes. It can be, any number of things. And then also giving them the information that they need. I believe in empowering my constituents. So wherever possible, I try and give them an explanation and understanding and give them tools to take their own action, that they're not just dependent upon me, but also enabling them to be problem solvers of their own by giving them some of those tools. That's kind of the approach and kind of the win. And I think more than anything, I think trustworthy. It's really important for me with my constituents, and the greatest value they can say, Mary, we love supporting you because we can trust you. That's really important, and probably in this day and age. But it's always been my motto, even way back when I was on the Community Education Advisory Council. I felt the same way then as I do now. It's just that the offices got a little bit bigger and higher, but that kind of thing I found has always been a value to me and value to the people that I serve.
I have to throw in a comment. I have to say that all of you are so humble in speaking about your achievements, which is also, I think, so unique to women. I think men tend to boast about every little thing that they achieve, and all four of you who have done such incredible things for your, for your constituents and your amazing careers. Speak about it. It was such humility. It's so refreshing, and it's just wonderful. I'd like to turn it to Aliza to tell us about her experience from the Knesset, what it's like to for you to get to a win, if you will, and just tell us a little bit about what the process is like. How do you garner support? How do you listen to your constituents, try to promote an idea, and then really get the kind of support that you need in order to get to the end result?
The system is different from the other colleagues just share with us, but I think it's the same. First of all, to listen to the audience, to the people. Legislation, they are coming from the people, from stories, from problem. We have to listen and to try to fix together, to understand the situation, to go and visit places and to leave the Knesset, leave the parliament and meet the people and listen to them and bring the problems, the issues, the requests to the parliament and try to change with this tool, that tool, and if we can't change or fix, then to legislate. Legislation is not, the only tool that we have as a member of parliament. And what I found more is, I don't know what Michal would say, but I'm sure that she will agree with me that women worked very, very, very hard in the parliament. I found much more men in the, mingling or whatever. They have to talk and they have to share with their colleagues' opinion. We, women, we worked so hard. And when I found myself as a chairwoman of the Committee of Combating Trafficking and Women and Prostitution, this issue was an problematic issue in the last 10 years, and people worked on it before, but we understood that we have opportunity because we were some, a member of parliament that came from, as I said before, we were activists in some fields like Michal share with us, and I came from field that work with women. And we understood that we have opportunity to change and to say that prostitution is not anymore a situation that, we have to change the problem in the situation. And it took 10 years to legislate this legislation, but the issue and what I want to say now that we work together. From, in Israel, me and Michal belong to a left party. I myself, I'm Orthodox, and I was part of a center party in the parliament. But we understood that we have opportunity to change, to do something together. So in this kind of example of this very complicated process of this legislation that prostitution is against the law in Israel, we worked together. And, we put the ego out of the game and we put the other identities that we are not agree, and we understood together that we have to take this opportunity and have this legislation. Thank God we did it. And this is only one example. We can share, and Michal maybe will share another examples. But when we understood that as women, we have the power to change, we need to work together and remind that always we have to think about women that are not with us here, even now in this webinar, women that don't even know that there is a webinar like this, that they can come and join and listen and try to change and make the change in their life on maybe one day to be senator or member of the Israeli parliament. And we always have to think about the women and the men that are not with us in the room.
Yeah. Michal, if you could respond and also speak and start up sort of a final lightning round, because we are running against a very fast time clock, I have to say. So if you could speak to that, your particular wins, and also take us to the what is your vision for the future, and do you think we are on a path of greater equality for women in government and just generally in society? And I think all four of you have worked and continue to work very hard to get us there. But just if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so two very important things. One, that is we did have a good collaboration in the Knesset between the parties, right, left, and our Knesset, our parliament, as in the United States, are very divided, and we have segregation between groups of society in the parties in the Knesset, Arab alone, the ultra-Orthodox alone, and so on. So we have a lot of segregation, but still we manage as women legislator to have a collaboration, to work together to stop some initiative of the government that could be disaster to women, and also to promote legislation that was really hard to promote against the government, and we couldn't have done it without a collaboration between left, right, coalition, opposition, and it was amazing. And we did it, and I think, that's we have to give us a good on the shoulder. So that's one thing. But I have to say, and it's not easy to say, but we need to say it. It's not, we always talk about representation of women. We need more representation, and we always count how many members of parliament, how many members of Congress, how many judges, how many, whatever. But we have to remember that it's not enough just the number of women. We need women that are feminist, that they believe in gender equality, that they're promoting gender equality. Because I know also about member of parliament, women member of parliament, they are not promoting the equality for all genders and the status of women in Israel, and even a little bit, even make it worse. So it's important to elect people, not only women and men, to have representation of women, of course, because I want my 15-year-old girl to look at the Knesset and to say, you know what, I can be a member of, I can be a representative, or I can be even mayor, or I can be the prime minister. Yes, I want that. But still, I want the women that are being elected to the Knesset to be one that promote the status of women. And if you ask me about the future, and I'm closing. If you ask me about the future, I think that if we look, I want to be optimistic. And if we look 20 years ago, 50 years ago, we didn't have the Me Too campaign. We didn't have a lot of very good legislation that promote the status of women and give us gender equality. But we still, it's like a dance, 2 steps ahead, 1 step back, and there'll always be a backlash. If we succeed to have any kind of success in the women status, the men will pull us out. So it will not, we didn't finish the revolution. We're still in the middle of it, and we have to work together, to collaborate, to work together all over the world, like we're doing here, and also in any country, to work together to promote the status of women and gender equality. And thank you so much, you're amazing.
Thank you, Michal. Can anyone else quickly speak to the future? I know we only have a minute to go, and I do need to wrap up soon, but if anyone would like to speak to the future real quick and your vision, and are we on the right path?
I'm happy to just, close this with, I just want to say that I think that we all know that nothing happens in one broad brush stroke, that legislatures, whether Knesset or a legislature in one of the United States or anywhere in the world, are laboratories of ideas. This is where we do our work. This is where we debate. This is where we do our thinking. And it is an opportunity beyond reproach. It is the greatest thing we can do with our lives is make lives better for others. Tikkun olam, right? And so, we have to be patient. We have to collaborate. We know that women are the hardest workers. That's it. We know that they're more sensitive. I personally believe that they are, and that we're here to speak for voices. But we also have to capture the moment that we're in and the opportunity we have to make change in people's lives and in these laboratories of ideas. And for that, I feel very grateful that I have had the chance to do that. And I'm sure that all of you feel the same way.
Thank you. Thank you for these wonderful closing remarks. Thank you, everybody, so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your hard work and keep on keeping on. It's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure for me. I do need to turn it over to Cassia to say final remarks on behalf of the America-Israel Friendship League. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. This webinar is also being recorded and available if you've missed us. So again, thanks everyone and have a great day. Cassia?
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you guys for an authentic discussion. I'm sure our audience appreciated it. And it was definitely my pleasure to be here with all of you. I want to extend a special thank you to NCSL, specifically Stacey Householder and both her colleagues from the Women's Legislative Network, Irene Kawanabe and Martha Sayens, who worked tirelessly to bring this project together. I want to formally thank the panel, Senators Keff, Meyer and Feigenholtz, as well as former members of Knesset, Michal Rosen and Elisa Levy. It has indeed been a pleasure. As Elsa said, Elsa, I just want to thank you as well. Elsa is one of our freshman board members, and I just want to say you did a phenomenal job, and we'd love to work with you all again. So as you know, we do these webinars twice a week, Sundays and Wednesday at noon, and we would love to have you join us this coming Wednesday, where we feature Mekudeshet, contemporary award-winning Israeli art organization that brings artists from East and West Jerusalem together. I want to thank our audience for joining us. I'm sure they wish it was a longer discussion, but we really appreciate it. And happy International Women's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Tada. Goodbye.
Goodbye.